The outpost was quiet. Too quiet, Elias Ronnie thought. He stood near the wide glass window of the orbital station and looked out at the barren moon below. Its surface was gray, cracked, and filled with shadows. No life grew there. No wind moved across its valleys. Only dust and rock spread out endlessly under the pale glow of a distant sun. The station itself was little more than a metal shell. It had been built to watch over the mining drones on the moon's surface. The drones dug through stone, searching for rare minerals that could be shipped back to Earth. Elias was the only human assigned to this lonely outpost. Every few months, a supply ship came with food, parts, and news. But between those visits, it was just him and the machines. He had grown used to the silence. Used to the hum of engines, the low vibration of generators, and the steady blinking of control panels. He worked during the day repairing circuits, checking drone reports, and recalibrating satellites. At night, he often sat by the window staring into the stars, wondering if someone somewhere was looking back at him. It was a life of waiting. Waiting for something to break. Waiting for something to arrive. Waiting for time itself to move faster. And then, one evening, something did arrive. Elias noticed it first as a faint light on the scanner. A dot moving slowly against the black background of space. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe a broken satellite drifting through the system. But the dot kept moving with purpose, cutting across the scanner's grid lines. His eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to the screen. The object had no identification signal, no transponder, no registration code. That was unusual. All official ships carried beacons. Even old civilian freighters had basic ID signals. But this thing was silent. Elias tapped the console. Computer magnify Sector 6-4. The screen zoomed in. The dot became a faint shape, a small shuttle. Its hull scarred, its movements uneven. It looked like it had been damaged. Elias frowned. A shuttle this far from regular trade routes? Without ID? And damaged? He stood quickly and pulled on his jacket. His heart was beating faster than usual. It could be an accident. Someone could be in need of help. But it could also be trouble. Pirates sometimes disguised themselves as broken ships. Smugglers sometimes flew silent to avoid detection. Still, he couldn't ignore it. He pressed the comms button. Unidentified vessel, this is Outpost 17. You are approaching a restricted zone. Identify yourself immediately, no response. Only static, Elias tried again. This is Outpost 17. Do you copy? Still nothing. The shuttle continued its slow path toward the station. He hesitated, then activated the docking bay's auto-guide system. A soft green light pulsed from the outpost, a beacon inviting the shuttle in. To his surprise, the shuttle adjusted its course and moved toward the docking bay. Its engines flickered weakly like a candle about to go out. Minutes later, the shuttle clamped against the station's airlock. Elias stood by the inner hatch, holding a small plasma cutter in one hand. It wasn't a weapon meant for fighting, but it could cut through steel if needed. He hoped he wouldn't need it. The outer hatch opened with a hiss. Steam rolled into the docking bay, and then slowly someone stepped through. It was a woman. She was tall and slender, her skin faintly luminous under the station lights. Her hair flowed in strands of silver, and her eyes glowed faintly blue. She wore a suit of strange fabric, torn in places, scorched in others. She looked exhausted, her steps unsteady. Elias froze. She was not human. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Elias felt his throat tighten. He had seen pictures of other species in training manuals, but never this one. He didn't even recognize her race. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The alien woman looked at him, her eyes soft but unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. It was not a wide smile. It was faint, almost fragile, but it was warm. It was the kind of smile that carried more meaning than words. And then, without saying anything, she collapsed onto the metal floor. Elias rushed forward. He dropped the plasma cutter and caught her before she hit the ground fully. Her body felt light, fragile, but warm. He laid her gently on the deck. Computer medical scan, he shouted. The system hummed and projected a thin blue light over her body. Numbers scrolled across the small display. Elevated heart rate, dehydration, minor injuries, nothing immediately fatal. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She was alive, just weak. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to the medbay. The station's corridors were narrow and quiet, filled only with the sound of his footsteps and the faint hum of power conduits. The med bay was small, just a single bed, some scanners, and a supply of basic medicines. He placed her gently on the bed. For hours, Elias stayed by her side. He gave her water through a small tube and applied patches to her wounds. She didn't wake, but her breathing steadied. Her face, even in sleep, remained calm. That faint smile never fully left her lips. When he finally sat down, exhaustion hit him. His hands trembled. He had lived alone for so long, and now here was someone else, someone not even human, sleeping only a few feet away. He stared at her, questions racing in his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was her ship damaged? Why had she come here, to this lonely outpost at the edge of nowhere? And why, above all else, had her first act been to smile at him? The next day, Elias woke to the sound of movement. He opened his eyes and saw her sitting up on the bed. She was awake. Her eyes met his, and again she smiled. Elias stood slowly. "You're awake," he said softly. He tried speaking in standard trade tongue. "Can you understand me?" She tilted her head, her expression gentle. No words came. Only silence. He tried another language, then another. Still nothing. She simply looked at him with calm eyes and a quiet smile. "You don't speak?" he asked finally. Her smile deepened slightly as if she understood but chose not to answer. Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Great, just great. A mystery guest with no ID and no words." But even as he said it, he didn't feel angry. He felt something else, curiosity. She raised her hand slowly and pointed at the window where the stars shone. Then she lowered her hand and placed it gently against her chest. Her smile remained. Elias felt a strange warmth in his chest. It was as if, somehow, without words, she was telling him something important. Something he couldn't yet understand, but he would. He had a feeling that this was only the beginning. The station had not changed. The lights still glowed with their steady rhythm. The hum of the engines still filled the air. The mining drones still sent back their endless streams of data. But for Elias Ronnie, everything felt different now. The difference lay in the med bay, where the strange alien woman sat quietly on the narrow bed. She was awake now, fully alert, though she still had not spoken a single word. Her glowing blue eyes followed him when he walked past. And when their gazes met, she would give him that faint, calm smile. Elias had lived in silence for so long that he almost found it strange to have another presence around him. Yet he did not mind the silence she carried. In fact, it felt lighter than the silence of the empty outpost. Her silence was not empty. It was watchful, present. That morning, Elias prepared a simple meal from the supply rations. He set a tray down near her. "Food," he said slowly, pointing to the packets of bread and protein stew. The woman tilted her head and studied the tray. Then she looked back at him. She touched one of the packets, hesitated, and opened it carefully. She sniffed the contents, then took a cautious bite. Elias watched closely. To his relief, she nodded, almost as if in approval. Then she looked at him again, smiled softly, and continued eating. He let out a small laugh. "Guess that means you like it." She said nothing, but her smile widened just a little. Days passed, and slowly, Elias grew used to her presence. He gave her space to recover, but she often followed him through the narrow halls of the station. She moved quietly, her steps light, almost soundless. Sometimes he would turn and find her standing just behind him, watching as he worked. At first, it startled him. "You're like a shadow," he muttered once, half amused. She tilted her head again, not in confusion, but as if she was amused too. And of course, she smiled. Elias began to test ways to communicate. He tried words again, speaking in different dialects. Nothing worked. She gave no verbal reply, but she was not without understanding. One afternoon, while he was repairing a damaged circuit in the drone bay, he dropped a small tool. Before he could reach for it, she bent down, picked it up, and handed it to him without hesitation. "Thanks," Elias said, taking it from her. She nodded, her eyes calm. Then she did something surprising. She pointed at the circuit board he had been struggling with, moved her fingers over a section, and made a twisting gesture. Elias frowned. "You mean this?" He adjusted the wire the way she seemed to indicate. The circuit sparked once, then settled. The board lit up, fully repaired. He stared. "You knew that?" She only smiled. Elias shook his head, half in disbelief. "So you understand more than you let on." Her smile deepened and she gave a small nod. After that, she began helping him more often. She had an eye for detail. When Elias worked on the control consoles, she would gesture to the right buttons before he touched them. When he checked the outer panels of the station, she pointed toward weak spots in the wiring that he hadn't noticed. It was as if she saw patterns he couldn't. Elias started talking more, even if she didn't reply. He found himself filling the silence with words. "These drones," he would say, pointing at the little machines flying outside. "They dig for minerals, bring them back, and I just fix them when they break. That's my life. Not very exciting, right?" She would glance at him with that soft expression, as though to say she disagreed. Sometimes he told her about Earth, about the oceans, the forests, the cities filled with people. "Not like this place," he said once, looking out the window at the gray, lifeless moon. "Earth is alive. You'd like it there." The alien woman listened, her eyes thoughtful, her smile never fading. At night, Elias often dreamed of her smile. It wasn't the smile of someone hiding secrets or mocking him. It was the smile of someone patient, someone who carried a calm strength inside. He didn't know why, but that smile made him feel less alone. For the first time in years, the silence of the outpost didn't feel heavy. One day, while checking the communications array, Elias noticed something strange. The signal feed had static. At first, he thought it was normal interference from solar radiation, but then he realized the static had a pattern. He froze. That's not random. The woman, standing behind him as always, leaned closer to the screen. Her eyes widened slightly. She touched the panel and pointed at the repeating pulses of static. "You see it too," Elias said softly. It was a code. He couldn't fully read it, but he knew it was deliberate. Someone was sending signals, and they were aimed at his outpost. He turned toward her. "Is this for you?" For the first time, her smile faded. She looked down, her expression troubled. Elias felt a chill run through him. He had lived long enough on the frontier to know that unexplained signals rarely meant anything good. That evening, he found her in the observation deck. She stood by the window staring at the stars. The glow of the distant sun lit her silver hair, making her look almost unreal. Elias stepped beside her. "I know you can't or won't speak, but I need to understand, are those signals dangerous?" She turned her head slightly, met his eyes, and held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, she raised her hand and placed it on the glass, pointing at a cluster of stars. Elias followed her finger. "There?" She nodded. Her eyes were serious, and her smile did not return this time. Elias sighed. "All right. I'll trust you. But if this is trouble, I need to know what we're dealing with." She said nothing, only stood beside him, silent as the stars. Later that night, while he lay in his bunk, Elias couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the way her smile had faded when she saw the signals. Until now, her silence had felt calm, even comforting. But tonight it felt heavy. It felt like she carried a truth she was not ready to share. Yet, despite his doubts, one thing was clear: she trusted him enough to stay, and for reasons he could not explain, he trusted her too. The days that followed only deepened their bond. She helped him with his work, stayed by his side, and even began to use gestures to explain things more clearly. Sometimes she would draw shapes with her finger on a panel, or point twice at something important. Elias learned to read her gestures like a language, and through it all, her smile remained. It was more than just kindness. It was a bridge, a quiet promise that even without words they could understand each other. One evening, while repairing the outer solar panels, Elias slipped on the smooth surface. His safety line caught him, but his tool drifted into space. He cursed, watching it float away. Then, before he could react, the alien woman reached out with astonishing speed. Her hand moved with precision, catching the tool just before it drifted too far. Elias stared. "How did you—" She only handed it back to him with that same smile. He laughed, shaking his head. "I don't know who you are, but I'm glad you're here." Her eyes softened, and though she still said nothing, Elias felt she had heard every word. As he drifted back into the station with her, Elias realized something important. He was no longer waiting for time to pass. He was no longer counting the days until the next supply ship, because she was here. And somehow, her quiet presence made the endless silence of the outpost feel alive again. But deep inside, Elias also knew something else. The signals were not going away. and sooner or later the silence would break. The outpost felt different now. For weeks, Elias Rani had grown used to the quiet company of the alien woman. She had no voice, no name that he knew, but her silent smiles and calm presence had filled the station with a warmth he had never felt before. But now, things were changing. The signals had returned. Not random static, not background noise. They came again and again, pulsing with clear rhythm. Elias could no longer ignore them. He sat in the control room, his hands moving over the console as he tried to decode the pattern. The woman stood beside him, her glowing blue eyes fixed on the screen. She leaned closer when the signals repeated, her expression sharp. "It's not from Earth," Elias muttered. "And it's not from the mining drones either. This is something else." She nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. For once she did not smile. Hours passed. Elias tried different decoding methods, but the message remained unclear. Still, he could see it was structured. Whoever sent it had purpose. Finally, in frustration, he leaned back. "I can't read this. Not with the tools I have here." The woman stepped forward. She touched the console gently, then began to move her fingers over the keys. Elias watched in surprise as she worked with calm precision. Symbols appeared on the screen, patterns he didn't recognize. "You know this?" he whispered. She glanced at him and gave a small nod. Her expression was serious, but there was no fear. Lines of data shifted until a set of coordinates appeared. A location in deep space, not far from the outpost's current orbit. Elias frowned. "That's close, too close." She pointed firmly at the coordinates, then at him, then back at the screen. Her meaning was clear. She wanted him to go there. Elias hesitated. Protocol was strict. He was not supposed to leave the outpost without orders. He was here to maintain the station, not to chase unknown signals into deep space. But when he looked at her, at the way she held his gaze without blinking, he felt his resolve weaken. Her smile had returned, not bright, not playful, but steady like a promise. He sighed. "All right, I'll trust you. Let's see what's out there." The small shuttle bay of the outpost had only one working craft, a maintenance vessel meant for short trips. Elias ran checks while the woman stood silently beside him. "Not exactly built for adventure," he muttered, tightening a bolt, "but it'll get us to those coordinates." She watched carefully, and when he made a small mistake, she tapped his arm and pointed at the part he had overlooked. He chuckled. "I'd be lost without you, you know." Her only reply was that familiar soft smile. They launched the shuttle into the dark. The stars stretched out like endless sparks, and the dead moon fell away behind them. Elias sat at the controls, hands steady. The woman sat beside him, silent, her eyes fixed on the glowing coordinates. Hours passed in silence. Elias spoke now and then, mostly to keep himself calm. "You know, I used to dream about seeing something new out here. I thought maybe a ship, maybe a planet. Never thought it would be you." She glanced at him, and though she said nothing, her smile made him feel his words had reached her. Finally, the coordinates brought them to their destination. At first it looked like empty space. But then against the black, Elias saw a shape, a ship. It was massive compared to their small shuttle, but it was broken. Its hull was torn with scars of battle. Panels drifted loose around it, glowing faintly in the darkness. The ship had no lights, no power. It was a corpse floating among the stars. Elias swallowed hard. "What happened here?" The woman's face grew tense. She pointed toward the wreck, urging him to move closer. The shuttle docked with the derelict ship. With slow, careful steps, Elias and the woman entered through a torn airlock. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing shattered walls, burned wires, and empty corridors. There were no bodies, only silence. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Looks like a battle. Whoever attacked didn't leave survivors." The woman walked ahead with careful steps. Her hand trailed lightly over the walls, almost as if she was remembering something. They reached what looked like the control chamber. Screens were shattered, consoles burned out. But in the center, half buried under debris, was something glowing faintly. A strange device still alive despite the damage around it. The woman hurried forward. She knelt beside the device and began to work, her fingers moving quickly over its surface. Elias watched, unsure. "Is that safe?" She glanced back at him, her eyes calm, and nodded once. Minutes later, the device came to life. A soft hum filled the chamber, and a projection rose into the air. It was a star map. Dozens of points of light glowed, connected by faint lines. Some were marked in green, others in red. The map shifted, showing movements, routes, and strange symbols Elias couldn't read. He stared in awe. This is a tracker, a record of something. The woman stood and pointed at the red lines. Her eyes darkened. Elias felt his chest tighten. Enemies, she nodded. Green allies? Again she nodded, and then she pointed at a blue dot on the map, their location. Elias whispered, "We're in the middle of it." For the first time since she had arrived, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, carrying weight despite its gentleness. The words were not in his language, but the tone told him everything. Sorrow, urgency, warning. Elias froze, stunned by the sound. "You can speak," he whispered. She looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness, and gave the faintest nod. "Then why didn't you?" he asked, almost breathless. She searched for words, then finally whispered in broken standard, "Trust." First, Elias felt his throat tighten. She had been silent all this time, not because she could not speak, but because she had wanted to see if she could trust him. And now, in this ruined ship, she had chosen to share her truth. The star map shifted again. Elias leaned closer, studying the red lines. They weren't random. They were moving, spreading, cutting across systems like a slow storm. He realized what it meant. Whoever had attacked this ship was still out there, and they were moving closer. He turned to her. "They're coming here, aren't they?" She lowered her eyes and gave a single, heavy nod. Back on the shuttle, Elias sat in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. The woman sat beside him, her hands folded, her expression calm but serious. "You came here to warn us," Elias said slowly. "That's why you found me. That's why you stayed." She looked at him, her eyes shining softly. Then she smiled, not the fragile smile of before, but something deeper. A smile that carried both sorrow and hope. Elias returned the smile weakly. "Well, I guess humanity's not going to be bored anymore." For the first time, she let out a soft laugh. Brief but clear. It was the sound of two worlds beginning to understand each other. As the shuttle turned back toward the outpost, Elias knew the silence of his old life was gone forever. Now there were signals, enemies, and mysteries far greater than his lonely station, but there was also her, and somehow that made all the difference. The shuttle docked with the outpost again, the sound of metal clamps echoing through the empty bay. Elias Rane shut down the engines, his hands still trembling slightly. He had been on short trips before, to check satellites, to repair drones, but never anything like this. Now he had seen a wrecked ship, a map of stars marked with danger, and most of all, he had finally heard the alien woman speak. Her voice still echoed in his mind, soft, melodic, filled with weight. She had spoken only a few words in his language, but they were enough. Trust first. He knew now that she carried secrets. She had chosen silence until he had proved himself, and now, after finding the map, she had shown him the truth. The truth that something terrible was coming. Inside the outpost, the woman followed him silently to the control room. The star map projection they had taken from the wreck was now stored in the console. The lights of green and red glowed faintly in the dark room. Elias sat heavily in his chair. His fingers rubbed his temples. So, they're hunters. Whoever they are, they destroy ships, maybe whole fleets, maybe more. The woman stood at the console. She raised her hand, touched one of the red lines, and whispered something in her own tongue. Her voice was calm but heavy, as if naming an enemy. Elias leaned forward. "I don't know your words, but I understand enough. They're moving toward us." She turned to face him, her glowing eyes steady. Then she spoke again in broken standard, choosing her words carefully. "Hunters," she said. Elias felt a chill. "Hunters? That's what you call them?" She nodded slowly. "What do they want?" he asked. "Why attack? Why chase?" She hesitated, then sat across from him. Her hands folded in her lap, and for a moment she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her calm smile returned, but it was different this time. It was a smile full of sorrow. "Erase," she whispered. Elias frowned. "Erase, you mean destroy?" Her eyes lowered. She nodded again. The word hung heavy in the air. For hours, Elias asked questions, and slowly, piece by piece, she answered. Her voice was broken, her grammar simple, but the meaning was clear enough. She told him her people had lived far away, on worlds filled with forests and seas. They were builders, healers, and dreamers. They had technology that could see across stars, engines that could carry them through light years. They were not warriors. Then the hunters came. They were relentless, silent, and merciless. No diplomacy, no warning, no mercy. They attacked her people's ships, then their colonies, then their homeworlds. Why? Elias asked. What do they gain from it? She shook her head. Not gain. Not need, just erase. Her words sent a cold shiver down Elias's spine. These hunters did not fight for resources. They did not conquer for territory. They destroyed simply to wipe others out. Her people had fought to survive. They built fleets, sent scouts, searched for allies. But the hunters always pressed harder, always moved faster. Worlds fell one by one. Finally, her leaders made a decision. A desperate one. They would send ships carrying warnings and knowledge across the stars, searching for civilizations that might resist the hunters. Her ship had been one of those. And it was destroyed, Elias whispered. She nodded, her eyes dark. Last. Elias leaned back, his chest tight. She was the last survivor of her mission, maybe even the last of her kind in this part of the galaxy. And you came here, he said softly. To us, to humanity. She looked at him. Her smile returned, faint but warm. Yes, she whispered. Trust, human. Elias stood and paced the small control room. His hands clenched at his sides. He had lived his whole life believing the frontier was quiet, empty, waiting to be explored. But now he knew there were hunters in the dark, and they were coming. Humanity has no idea, he muttered. Back on Earth, they think the biggest problems are politics and trade wars. They don't know there's something out here that wants to erase everything. He turned to her. If we warn them, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll prepare. She shook her head slowly. No time. Elias froze. What do you mean, no time? She stepped to the console, touched the red lines on the map. They were close. Too close. The hunters were already moving toward their sector. His stomach sank. They're coming here. She nodded once firmly. That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the outpost around him. His thoughts raced. Humanity had always feared invasion. Stories of alien conquerors had filled books and screens for centuries. But the truth was worse. These hunters didn't conquer. They erased, and the only warning humanity had was her. He turned in his bunk and stared at the small medallion she had given him earlier that evening. It was a piece of her ship, etched with patterns that glowed faintly. She had pressed it into his hand and said in her soft voice, Hope. He closed his eyes, gripping the medallion tightly. The next day, Elias prepared the outpost's defenses. It was a mining station, not a fortress, but he worked with what he had. He recalibrated the drone controls, turning mining bots into makeshift patrol craft. He armed the plasma cutters with improvised mounts. He rerouted the station's power grid to strengthen the shields. The woman helped him. Her hands were precise, her gestures clear. She showed him ways to connect circuits more efficiently, ways to focus the energy output. It was clear her people's technology was far more advanced. Together, they made the quiet outpost into something more. Not much, but more than it had been. As they worked side by side, Elias spoke. You know, humanity isn't great at everything. We argue, we fight, we make mistakes. But one thing we're good at is surviving. If someone pushes us, we push back harder. That's what you'll see. She looked at him with her calm smile, and for the first time, her eyes carried something brighter than sorrow. Human strong, she whispered. That evening, they stood on the observation deck watching the stars. Elias leaned against the glass, arms crossed. She stood beside him, her hands folded. He broke the silence. If your people sent warnings to other civilizations, maybe we're not alone. Maybe others got the message too. She nodded, then tilted her head. Maybe. Then we're not fighting alone, he said firmly. Not forever. Her smile deepened slightly, and she placed her hand lightly against the glass, as she had the first time. Elias looked at her and smiled back. For the first time, the silence between them was not heavy, not uncertain. It was filled with understanding, but the peace did not last. The next day, the sensors screamed. Elias rushed to the console. The display showed 3 approaching signals. They were large, fast, and moving directly toward the outpost. His heart raced. It's them. The woman stood behind him, her face calm but firm. She placed her hand on his shoulder. Together, she whispered. Elias nodded, swallowing his fear. Together. The hunters had come, and now humanity's fight was about to begin. The alarms rang through the outpost. Red lights flashed across the metal walls, and the sound of warning sirens echoed through the quiet halls. Elias Rane stood at the control console, his eyes locked on the approaching signals. 3 enemy ships, bigger than anything the outpost could withstand, faster than any patrol craft nearby. They were hunters, and they were closing in. The alien woman stood beside him. Her face was calm, her glowing eyes steady. She did not look afraid. She only placed her hand lightly on his arm and whispered one word. "Ready?" Elias nodded, though his heart pounded in his chest. He had prepared the outpost as best he could. Shields reinforced, drones armed, power rerouted. But he knew the truth. Against hunters, even the strongest fortress might fall. And yet he refused to give in. The first hunter ship appeared on the scanner, a sharp silhouette against the stars. Its hull was black, absorbing light, almost invisible except for the faint lines of crimson that pulsed along its surface. It looked like a predator moving through deep water, silent and certain. Elias clenched his jaw. "They're testing us." "Watching before they strike," the woman nodded. "Always watch. Always learn." "Not this time," Elias muttered. His hands moved quickly over the controls. The mining drones launched from the outpost, their engines burning bright. They had once been tools for digging rock and breaking asteroids, but now they flew as soldiers. Their plasma cutters glowed like blades in the dark. The first wave of drones rushed toward the hunter ship. Beams of red light lanced out from the enemy vessel, cutting 2 drones apart in seconds, but the others pressed forward, striking against the hunter's hull. Sparks exploded. Metal screeched. For a brief moment, the hunter slowed. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It works. They can bleed." But the second hunter ship appeared, then the third. The outpost shook as crimson beams cut through space, hammering at the shields. Warning lights flared across the console. "Shields at 60%, Elias shouted. "We can't take this for long." The woman moved beside him, her hands dancing across the alien device she had carried since the wreck. She connected it to the outpost systems, and suddenly the shield readings shifted. Power flowed in ways Elias had never seen before. The shields brightened, holding stronger against the next barrage. Elias turned to her, wide-eyed. You boosted them?" She smiled softly. Together. The word gave him strength. For hours the battle raged. Drones flew and fell. Beams lit the darkness. The outpost shook again and again. Each time Elias thought they were finished, the woman's calm presence steadied him. She gave directions with gestures and short words, showing him weak points, teaching him to strike smarter, and slowly, incredibly, they held. The first hunter ship was crippled, its hull cracked, drifting powerless. The second kept its distance, wary now. The third circled like a predator searching for weakness. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. "We're not dead yet," the woman gave a faint smile. "Not dead. Alive." But Elias knew they could not win this way. Sooner or later, the hunters would push harder. Reinforcements would come. Humanity's outpost would fall. Unless his eyes fell on the star map, the one they had taken from the wreck. It showed not just hunter movements, but also their network of travel paths, their hidden trails between stars. An idea formed in his mind. Dangerous, reckless, but maybe the only chance. He looked at the woman. "We can't just fight them here. We have to hit them where they don't expect. We have to send a message, not just to humanity, but to them. Show them humans won't just wait to be erased." She tilted her head, studying him. "Strike back?" "Yes," Elias said. His voice grew firm. "Strike back." Together they worked quickly. Elias programmed the drones with new instructions, not to fight directly, but to lure. The woman adjusted the alien device, creating a false signal, a beacon of energy that mimicked a powerful reactor. When the hunters moved in for what they thought would be an easy kill, the drones led them away, deeper into an asteroid field nearby. The hunters followed. Elias triggered the mining charges buried in the rocks. Explosions tore through the field, asteroids shattering into clouds of stone. One hunter ship was ripped apart in the storm. Another was damaged, spinning out of control. The outpost shook again as debris struck, but the shields held. Elias let out a harsh laugh, his chest burning with adrenaline. "That's right. We're not prey anymore. The woman stood beside him, her eyes bright. Human fight. Human win. But the last hunter ship was not destroyed. It turned, furious now, and came directly for the outpost. Its weapons flared, brighter than before. The shields buckled, alarms screamed, panels sparked. Elias gritted his teeth. "This is it." "Last stand," the woman touched his shoulder. Her calm smile returned, the same smile she had worn the first time he met her. "Not last," she whispered. "First," Elias blinked. "First?" She nodded. "First stand. Human begin." And then she moved to the alien device, her hands flowing across its surface. She connected it deeper into the outpost's core. Energy surged, brighter and brighter, until the entire station glowed. Elias stared in awe. "What are you doing?" She looked at him one last time. Her smile said everything. Hope. And then the device activated. Light exploded from the outpost, a pulse of energy that rushed across space like a wave. It struck the hunter ship full force, ripping through its hull, shattering it into fragments. The pieces burned and vanished into the void. The alarms fell silent. The red lights stopped. Only the hum of the outpost remained. Elias sat in stunned silence, staring at the empty scanner. The hunters were gone. Slowly he turned. The alien woman stood near the device, her hands still resting on it. She looked weak, her shoulders trembling, but she was alive. He rushed to her side. You did it." Her smile was faint but filled with light. "We did it." In the days that followed, Elias sent a message to Earth, a warning with the star map attached. Proof of the hunters. Proof of the battle. Proof of survival. Humanity listened. For the first time in history, the scattered colonies, the rival nations, the fleets of Earth united. They prepared. Not for conquest, but for defense. For survival. For hope. And always at the center of it was the story of one outpost, one human, and one alien woman who had come quietly, with a smile that said everything. On the final night before the first human fleet launched, Elias stood once again on the observation deck. The stars stretched before him, endless and dark. But this time he did not feel small. The woman stood beside him. She still looked tired, but her smile was strong. Elias looked at her. "We're ready now. Because of you." She shook her head gently. "Because of us," he chuckled softly. "Fair enough." They stood in silence, watching the stars. And in that silence, Elias knew something deep in his heart. Humanity had been warned. Humanity had been tested. Humanity had stood. The hunters would come again. But they would not find prey. They would find humanity, and humanity would endure.